I've always been inspired by the Motown ladies, specifically because their music impacted a generation and helped lead a revolution.
Diana Ross was never just a Motown legend. She was the woman who held Michael Jackson's heart in a way no one fully understood, until now.
Because he's had it all done, but...
You cannot. I refuse you to insult Michael. He's a friend of mine. I love him, and I don't like people making fun.
At 81, she's finally shedding the elegance of omission and speaking the truth about a bond so private, so layered, it makes thriller plots seem straightforward. From secret shrines to will signatures, this isn't gossip. It's emotional archaeology. So what really happened behind the velvet curtains of their relationship? Stay with us. This is a truth you won't want to miss. Diana Ross reveals the bond Michael Jackson hid from the world. Not everyone knows what Diana Ross said to him the first time they met. She didn't offer a compliment or advice or even her name. She simply bent down, looked him in the eye, and called him sweetheart. And for Michael Jackson, that was enough. He was just 9, standing silent among powerful voices and glittering suits, his small frame swallowed by expectation. But that word, said with no agenda and no spotlight, stayed with him for life. It wasn't her fame that drew him in, though by then she was already the reigning queen of Motown. It was the fact that she saw him, really saw him, without asking him to be anyone else. In later years, he would describe her with a mix of affection and confusion. Mother, sister, lover. A sentence that made people pause. But for Michael, it captured the strange gravity between them. She wasn't simply a mentor or idol. She was the one person who reached into his isolation and gave it a name, belonging. Ross, who rarely gives interviews and almost never speaks about Michael, has finally broken her silence at age 81. Her voice trembled as she described their bond, not as a story of scandal, but as a quiet emotional tether. When others saw Michael as an icon in the making, she saw a child on the verge of breaking. When the cameras turned off, when the applause faded, she was the voice in his ear, reminding him he didn't have to earn love. It was already there. They rehearsed in hotel rooms, not studios. She taught him how to stand still, how to breathe through the nerves, how to smile when the world became too loud. During the filming of Diana in 1971, their chemistry on screen looked effortless. But that confidence was something Ross built with quiet encouragement, not demands. She never pushed. She waited. She believed. And that belief is what allowed Michael to believe in himself. Decades later, the world knew him as the king of pop. But Ross still heard the voice of the boy who once called her late at night, whispering fears most would never guess. "Do they still love me?" he asked her more than once, not the fans, not the industry, but those few who knew him before the mask hardened. He carried so much pain, Ross said. Behind all that brilliance was a boy who just needed someone to hold his hand. Even now, she says, she sees flashes of herself in the way he moved, in the way he spoke, in the way he braced himself before stepping into a room. It wasn't mimicry, it was memory. He didn't just learn from her, he kept her close in every gesture. And what really happened during those long days on the Wiz set? Was it friendship or something deeper? Keep watching. What happened during the Wiz? By 1978, Michael Jackson was no longer the wide-eyed boy who clung to Diana Ross's every word. At 20, he stood at a complicated crossroads. No longer the Motown child star, not yet the global phenomenon he was destined to become. Still wrestling with his identity, both publicly and privately, Michael stepped into the role of the Scarecrow, a character yearning for wisdom, unsure of himself, and desperately wanting to belong. It was, in so many ways, a reflection of who he was off-screen. Diana, meanwhile, took the lead as Dorothy. But The Wiz wasn't just a film for them. It was a shared rhythm, a chance to breathe the same air, work side by side, and exist in each other's space without handlers or headlines between them. For once, there were no brief backstage visits, no rushed conversations at award shows. This was consistent, uninterrupted closeness, and it began to show. Crew members quietly whispered about the way they lingered in conversation between takes, how Michael would soften around her in a way that felt different. One moment, however, stood out more than most. Michael, quiet and private by nature, invited Diana to stay at the modest apartment he'd rented during filming. Just her, no assistants, no entourage. No one spoke about it directly. Diana didn't explain. Michael never addressed it. But something about that night changed the way people around them looked at the two. They shared two musical numbers in the film, Ease On Down the Road and Brand New Day. The songs were full of energy, brimming with life. But if you looked closely, there was something else. Beneath the choreography and polished harmonies, there were glances, small, almost imperceptible shifts in posture and expression. It wasn't just performance, it was presence. A silent understanding passed between them in those unscripted moments. The Wiz wasn't a box office success. Critics called it forced, even clumsy. But for Michael, it offered something more valuable than acclaim. After filming ended, he moved differently, quieter, more inward. His public smile faded a little, but his gaze carried something steadier. As if, for once, he'd been allowed to simply be himself. Not a spectacle, not an icon, just a young man who had been truly seen. And if he only said it once, why does it still echo so loudly today? Keep watching. There's more to uncover. The confession Michael couldn't take back. In 1982, during what should have been a routine Ebony magazine interview, Michael Jackson, then on the verge of Thriller fame, broke character in a way few had ever seen. The mood had been light, the answers rehearsed. But then, casually, like it slipped out before he could catch it, he said, "It's Diana Ross. I love her." No metaphors, no showmanship, just 5 quiet words. People around him laughed awkwardly. Some thought he was teasing, but those closest to Michael knew this wasn't a joke. He wasn't acting. That moment was years in the making. Since his childhood days at Mottown, Michael had adored Diana, not just as a performer, but as a person. She wasn't just a crush. She was, in many ways, his compass. He had once said he'd marry her if he could. And when he said it, he meant it. Diana was older, yes, and living a world far ahead of his. But he never cared about that. With her, he felt seen, protected, understood, which is why when the invitation arrived, her wedding invitation, he didn't attend. He didn't send regrets. He didn't call. Diana Ross was marrying Norwegian businessman Arne Næss Jr. in a quiet European ceremony. And Michael? He went silent. Studio insiders say he disappeared for days. No rehearsals, no studio sessions, no dance routines, just stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't need to explain itself. When someone finally asked him why he hadn't gone, he answered without blinking, "I loved her, and I always will." That was it. Nothing more. To the world, Michael remained the king of pop. But in that moment, he was simply a man grieving something he never truly had, yet always longed for. It wasn't messy or dramatic, it was quietly profound. He never spoke poorly of her, never pointed fingers. Diana had chosen her joy, her path. But to him, she was still the girl from Mottown, the one who saw him when the world barely looked. Friends noticed the shift. His smile dulled. His arrivals slowed. Some said he stopped writing for a while, not because the words were gone, but because he couldn't bring himself to finish the songs. He didn't look to replace her. Didn't love anyone the same way in public again. It wasn't about clinging to fantasy. It was about honoring something he could never quite release, even after it slipped through his fingers. He held on to that love for the rest of his life, not as regret, but as something sacred. Whispers between the notes. Michael Jackson often said music was the only place he could tell the truth. And if you listened closely, some songs said what he never dared to out loud. Dirty Diana and Remember the Time weren't just hits. They were confessions hidden in plain sight. In 1987, Dirty Diana hit the airwaves, sharp and electric. He called it a warning against obsessive fans. But the year Diana Ross married Arna Ness Jr., this track, filled with frustration and longing, felt too personal to dismiss. The way he sang it on stage, with clenched fists and that wounded fire in his eyes, made many wonder if this wasn't just about groupies, but about someone he couldn't name. Then came Remember the Time in 1992, lush, romantic, and steeped in nostalgia. It told of a love that once was, but couldn't be again. In the music video, he plays a man longing for a queen already claimed. The elegance in his gestures, the ache behind every note, it was devotion dressed in rhythm. Though he never confirmed it, those closest to him knew the unspoken truth. In a private recorded phone call with his friend Glenda, Michael once said, "Our relationship was just in my head. No drama, just quiet heartbreak." She had been his mentor, his anchor, perhaps even a mother figure at first, but somewhere along the way, the lines blurred. At Neverland, there was a room few ever saw. Not a shrine, not an obsession, just a quiet corner filled with photos, notes, memories of her. Not something to boast about, something to keep. Michael never asked for love in return. What he carried wasn't about possession or public approval. It was about memory, a feeling that lingered in his work, his silence, his private moments, something that helped shape who he became and stayed with him long after the world stopped looking. No headlines, no big reveal, just a love that never got its timing right. And when Diana finally unlocked those long-buried memories, was it closure or a truth too big to contain? Don't blink, because what follows changes everything. The name that spoke louder than words. For decades, the public saw Michael Jackson as an enigma, brilliant, elusive, guarded. But tucked quietly into his final will, amid financial provisions and custody plans, was a name that brought everything into sharper focus. Diana Ross. Not a sibling, not a close cousin, not a business associate. Michael had named her as the one he trusted above almost everyone else. Should his beloved mother, Catherine, no longer be able to care for his children, it would be Diana who'd take over. That decision wasn't made lightly. It wasn't born from nostalgia or sentimentality. It was something far deeper, unspoken yet powerful. Michael's act didn't just echo love. It reflected devotion, trust, and a history too complex for words. He had never been one to hand over his heart, let alone his legacy. Yet here, on paper, was the proof. Diana wasn't just a muse or a mentor, she was family. And what's more haunting than what he wrote was what Diana never did. She didn't rush to the press. She didn't deny or confirm. She remained silent. A silence that echoed louder than any headline. As if they had built a world only the two of them understood. A space where Michael, the boy who trusted no one, found someone he believed would guard the most fragile parts of his life when he was gone. But their story didn't begin with lawyers or legal guardianship. It began with music, with magic, with a boy barely 10 and a woman who seemed to hold the world in the palm of her hand. Before the awards, before the surgeries, before the loneliness, Michael stood by Diana's side, eyes wide, heart open, watching every move. She didn't teach him the way a teacher might. She lived, and he observed. The way she moved on stage, how she took up space without apology, how her voice filled rooms and her presence silenced crowds. These were the lessons he absorbed. She wasn't just a star to him, she was the blueprint. He copied her rhythms, her oohs, the way she tilted her head or extended an arm just so. He even admitted it proudly in interviews, not as imitation, but as homage. Diana wasn't simply an influence. She was the first spark of Michael's stage persona. Her glamour, her elegance, the way she made the spotlight feel like home, all of it became the scaffolding for his own greatness. In his early days, the sharp suits, the sequins, the mystery in his gaze, they weren't random choices. They were echoes of her. But where Diana had pioneered the diva archetype in Mottown, Michael expanded it into a new dimension. Haunted, surreal, untouchable. And perhaps that's why, even as he became the most famous man on earth, he continued to carry her essence with him. Not in words, not in overt tributes, but in gestures, silence, and choices that only those who truly watched could understand. And if he never said her name, why did everything he touched still echo her presence? Keep watching, because what happened next shifted everything in an instant. What she finally said. That woman at 81, who for decades had offered nothing but carefully measured silence when asked about him, finally spoke, quietly, clearly, and without needing sympathy. It wasn't during an interview or on stage. It happened on a rainy afternoon, her voice steady, her silver-streaked hair framing a face shaped by both triumph and restraint. Those in the room had gathered simply to visit, unaware they were about to witness the closest thing to a confession she had ever made. "Michael loved me," she said, letting the words hang in the air like music fading on a final note. "Loved me in a way that doesn't have a name." Someone laughed nervously, assuming she was joking. But she didn't laugh. She simply shook her head and let the truth land gently. No emotion in her tone, no theatrics, just the weight of a reality she'd carried quietly for decades. And when asked if she loved him back, her eyes fell to the cold tea in her cup. "I cared for him," she said. "In every way a person can care. But to love him the way he loved me, I never let myself go there. Because it was too real. There was no bitterness, only clarity." For many years, fans and insiders had tried to understand what tied Michael Jackson and Diana Ross together. There were no stolen kisses, no exposed letters, no tabloid scandals. But every once in a while, a small detail slipped through, like his refusal to attend her wedding, or the copyright filing for Dirty Diana, dated the exact day she walked down the aisle. Even Michael's own words hinted at a depth the world could feel, but never quite name. In Ebony in 1982, he simply said, "It's Diana Ross. I love her." No code, no metaphor, just fact. There were other signs, hidden in plain sight. At Neverland Ranch, one visitor recalled a room where her photos were displayed under soft lighting, framed, arranged, almost sacred. No one knew why the space existed. No one dared to ask. And in his 2002 will, buried beneath layers of legal formality, Michael wrote that if his mother couldn't raise his children, Diana would. Not Janet, not LaToya, not a friend. Diana. To some, these might seem like coincidences. But for those who understood how Michael lived, how he layered meaning beneath symbols and masked emotion behind performance, nothing ever was. Every gesture, every omission was deliberate. And Diana's silence wasn't detachment. It was protection, because she understood the delicate weight of being both his idol and his longing. And she carried that truth without ever needing to explain it. But what do you think truly shifted when Diana spoke of Michael? Was it reflection or revelation? Don't blink, because what comes next will surprise you. The woman the world forgot, then remembered. For someone who had retreated so deeply into privacy, Diana Ross's reemergence in 2025 felt less like a comeback and more like a quiet reclaiming. When she stepped onto the Met Gala red carpet that spring evening in New York, it wasn't just fashion, it was a statement. At 81, she moved with the calm confidence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything.
With celebrities arriving, Diana Ross just arriving there now in quite a creation, a big long train with white fluffy feathers.
Her gown, breathtaking in its design, flowed behind her with an 18-foot train embroidered with the names of her children and grandchildren, each letter hand-stitched like a love letter in silk. It wasn't just an outfit. It was a story, one that spanned decades of fame, family, and resilience. Few knew that it was her youngest son, Evan, who urged her to attend. He reminded her not only of what she meant to the world, but what she still meant to them, to her family, her audience, her legacy. She hesitated at first, caught between the demands of her ongoing world tour and the pull of privacy. But eventually, love won. And as she stood beneath the flash of cameras that night, what shone brightest wasn't the couture, but the message stitched into every inch of that fabric, that she had built something beautiful, something lasting, not just on stages, but in the hearts of her family. And yet, amid all the celebration and applause, she didn't shy away from the shadows that shaped the story. In rare conversations that followed, low-lit interviews, quiet reflections, she opened up about Michael's battles, the media frenzy, the whispers, the transformation that left him barely recognizable to those who'd known him best. But she never pitied him. She spoke of his pain with grace, never judgment. He wasn't broken, she said once, her voice low and steady. He was beautiful, just burdened. She didn't speak to fix the record. She wasn't there to defend. She simply wanted people to see what had always been there. The person behind the myth, the boy she had once guided, the man she quietly grieved. He was Michael, she said. Not a ghost, not a headline, just Michael. And he was mine, in a way I never needed to explain. But what do you think Diana Ross was really trying to say with that silent, shimmering tribute? Was it a farewell, a warning, or something far more personal? We'd like to hear your take. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.